papers?
Now.
Immigration check?
I'm a physician here. My ID's in my car.
Sure you are. Everyone's got a story. You don't look like you belong here. Show me proof of citizenship.
My name's Dr. Angela Morris. I was born here. Okay. Call hospital administration.
We'll sort that out downtown. Dispatch, start me unit. Possible immigration issue. Face the wall. Hands up. Higher, do not move. Any weapons on you?
The Houston Medical Center parking lot was eerie and silent when it happened. Saturday night, the 14th of September 2024, at 10:19 p.m., the kind of humid Texas air that feels like a heavy, wet blanket clinging to your skin and making the neon hospital signs blur in the haze. Dr. Angela Morris had just stepped out of the emergency wing after a grueling 12-hour surgical shift. Still in her hospital scrubs, a thin cardigan thrown over her shoulders, and her stethoscope still draped around her neck. She had just reached her SUV when a black government SUV pulled into the adjacent spot, its headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Their body cameras were rolling, recording what would become the most expensive parking encounter in Texas history. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, you need to hit that subscribe button. Stories like this don't get told unless we tell them. And your support means these videos reach people who need to see what's really happening out here. The file on Dr. Angela Morris, marked confidential, pending litigation, began not with her groundbreaking surgical achievements or her sterling academic record, but with a stark timestamp. September 14, Launchhandling Arshasu, Arshardin Shurjiofen. That was the moment her life, painstakingly built on merit and dedication, intersected violently with the casual cruelty of official prejudice. The incident report from the Houston Police Department, later heavily redacted and fiercely fought over, would only ever capture a fraction of the raw, visceral fear that gripped her in the silent, humid expanse of the Houston Medical Center parking lot. But before we delve into the clinical sterility of official documentation, it's crucial to understand the woman behind the patient number and the man who saw only a demographic to be interrogated. Dr. Angela Morris, 42 years old, had earned her place. Born and raised in Houston's historic Third Ward, she was the embodiment of grit and brilliance. Her mother, a registered nurse who worked double shifts, had instilled in Angela a profound sense of purpose and an unshakable work ethic. Her father, a proud union man at the shipyards, taught her about dignity, resistance, and the quiet power of standing firm. Angela had graduated valedictorian from Lamar High School, then secured a full scholarship to Stanford University, eventually returning to her roots for medical school at Baylor College of Medicine. For the past 15 years, she had been a fixture at the Houston Medical Center, rising through the ranks to become a respected general surgeon, specializing in complex gastrointestinal procedures. Her hands, nimble and precise, had saved countless lives, often working through the dead of night, fueled by lukewarm coffee and an unwavering commitment to her patients. She lived alone in a quiet, tree-lined street in the Museum District, a modest but elegant home filled with books, jazz records, and the occasional laughter of her nieces and nephews whom she doted upon. Her life was defined by routine, by responsibility, and by a deep-seated belief in the system she served. A system that, in a few short minutes, would attempt to dismantle her. On the other side of the impending conflict stood Agent Robert Vance. 38, with a past as murky as a bayou swamp at midnight, Vance was an ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer, known within certain circles for his aggressive tactics and a keen, almost predatory, eye for targets. His personnel file, if one were to dig deep enough through the layers of bureaucracy, contained a troubling pattern. Multiple formal complaints for excessive force, a handful of informal grievances alleging racial profiling, and a consistent history of bending, if not outright breaking, procedural guidelines in the pursuit of what he termed vigilant enforcement. His superiors, eager to tout high arrest numbers and project an image of unwavering border security, had largely overlooked these transgressions, quietly transferring him between field offices when the pressure mounted. Vance's personal life was as messy as his professional one, marked by a recent divorce, alimony payments he perpetually resented, and a simmering resentment towards what he perceived as a society gone soft. He believed in strict hierarchies, unquestioning authority, and a simplistic view of justice where suspicion alone was often justification. For Vance, the world was divided into two camps, those who belonged and those who needed to prove it. And in his estimation, people like Dr. Angela Morris, a successful black woman in a white-dominated profession, often fell into the latter category by default. The night of the 14th of September 2024 had been particularly arduous for Angela. An emergency call had brought in a multiple trauma patient, a young mother involved in a devastating car accident. Angela had spent the last 7 hours on her feet, focused entirely on the delicate dance of scalpels and sutures, navigating the intricate landscape of human anatomy to repair what had been shattered. The operation had been a success. A small victory wrested from the jaws of tragedy. Now the adrenaline had drained, leaving her bones heavy with exhaustion. The sterile scent of antiseptic clung to her scrubs as she pushed open the heavy glass doors of the emergency exit, stepping out into the oppressive humidity of the Houston night. The parking lot, usually bustling even at odd hours, was eerily quiet save for the distant hum of the city and the occasional squeal of tires from the freeway. Her black Lexus SUV, her sanctuary on wheels, gleamed under the sparse sodium lamps. She fumbled for her keys, her mind already drifting to a hot shower and the blissful oblivion of sleep. It was then that the black government SUV, a Ford Expedition with dark-tinted windows, glided silently into the space directly behind her. She hadn't heard it approach, a testament to her exhaustion and the vehicle's stealth. The headlights, initially low, suddenly flared, blinding her momentarily. Before she could process the intrusion, two men, followed by a third, emerged from the vehicle. They moved with a practiced, predatory precision, fanning out to form a loose triangle, effectively corralling her against her own car. They were dressed in tactical vests over dark shirts, the bold letters ICE emblazoned across their chests, a chilling, stark white against the dark fabric. Their hands hovered near their sidearms, a silent, unspoken threat. Angela's cop brain, an instinctive, hyper-alert state honed by years of navigating volatile emergency rooms, immediately recognized the posture, aggressive, accusatory, and designed to intimidate. The lead agent, Robert Vance, stepped forward, his face obscured by the harsh glare of the SUV's headlights and the shadow of his cap. His voice, when it came, was flat, devoid of any preamble, cutting through the heavy air like a razor. His tone carried the weight of unquestionable authority, utterly contemptuous of any civilian's right to privacy or peace. Papers. Now. Immigration check. Angela, momentarily disoriented, blinked against the light. Her exhaustion warred with a rising tide of confusion and indignation. I'm a physician here. My ID's in my car. She gestured vaguely towards the driver's side door, her voice tight, already sensing the shift in the air, the fundamental disrespect. Vance scoffed, taking another step closer, invading her personal space. His eyes, though hidden in shadow, felt like steel boring into her. Sure you are. Everyone's got a story. You don't look like you belong here. Show me proof of citizenship. The words hung heavy, laced with an implicit accusation that had nothing to do with immigration status and everything to do with her skin. A cold anger began to simmer beneath Angela's exhaustion. She took a deep breath, forcing her voice to remain steady, controlled, professional. My name's Dr. Angela Morris. I was born here. Call hospital administration. She wasn't asking, she was telling. A physician, accustomed to giving directives, to commanding respect. Vance's reply was immediate, flat, and utterly dismissive. His gaze drifted past her, as if she were an inconvenience rather than a human being with rights. We'll sort that out downtown. The unspoken message was clear. Your explanations, your credentials, your birthplace. None of it mattered. You were a problem to be processed, an assumption already made, a narrative already written. The body cameras, silent witnesses, continued to roll, capturing the beginning of a nightmare that would expose the dark underbelly of power and prejudice. The heavy, humid air of the Houston night seemed to solidify around the parking lot, turning the space between Dr. Angela Morris and the three federal agents into a vacuum where reason could no longer breathe. When Agent Vance uttered the word downtown, he wasn't just suggesting a destination. He was issuing a decree of total subjugation, a dismissal of Angela's existence as a citizen, a neighbor, or a healer. Angela felt the familiar coldness of the surgical theater wash over her. Not the chill of the air conditioning, but the calculated, rhythmic slowing of her pulse that she utilized when a patient's artery nicked and the room began to fill with blood. She did not move toward the SUV. She did not flinch. Instead, she stood her ground with the rooted stability of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. "I am not going anywhere," she said, her voice a low, resonant vibration that carried through the damp air. "My identification, my medical board certification, and my hospital access badge are in my handbag on the passenger seat of my vehicle, less than 3 feet away. I am going to reach for them so this misunderstanding can end." It was a reasonable request, a logical bridge to sanity, but in the twisted theater of a high-stakes street stop, Vance viewed logic as a threat to his dominance. He took a predatory half-step forward, his boots crunching on the grit of the asphalt, his hand now visibly gripping the textured handle of his Glock 17. "Don't you move a muscle toward that car," Vance barked, his voice rising in pitch, intentionally injecting adrenaline into the encounter to destabilize the environment. "Any movement toward that vehicle will be interpreted as reaching for a weapon. You have been told to comply. You are currently obstructing a federal investigation. If you reach for that door, I will perceive it as a threat to my life and the lives of my partners. Do you understand the gravity of the situation you are creating, Doctor?" The use of her title as a slur was the catalyst for the two flanking agents, Miller and Sanchez, to tighten the noose. They moved with the synchronized, fluid aggression of men who had done this 1,000 times to people who didn't have the resources to fight back. Sanchez moved to her left, his body angled to cut off any path back to the hospital entrance, while Miller stepped behind her, the shadow of his tactical vest falling over her shoulders. Angela could hear the faint metallic clinking of their gear, the rattle of handcuffs, the scrape of nylon sounds that were designed to trigger a primal flight response. But Angela Morris was a student of the Constitution as much as she was of the Gray's Anatomy. She knew that the Fourth Amendment protected her against unreasonable seizures, and that reasonable suspicion was not a blank check for racial profiling. "Agent Vance," she began, her tone shifting to the authoritative register she used to command an operating room. "Under the law, you require specific, articulable facts to detain me. Being a black woman in a parking lot is not a crime. My vehicle is unlocked. If you are truly concerned about my identity, you may look through the window at the badge clipped to the console. You are intentionally escalating a peaceful encounter into a violent confrontation. I am unarmed. I am in my work uniform, and I am telling you exactly where my documentation is." The contrast was staggering. A surgeon with a mind like a diamond, offering a clear path to de-escalation, standing against 3 men who were actively hunting for a reason to use force. Vance didn't look at the car. He didn't care about the ID. He cared about the defiance. To him, a black woman citing the law was more dangerous than an armed suspect. It was a challenge to the very foundation of his perceived superiority. "I don't take legal advice from suspects," Vance hissed, his face now inches from hers, the smell of stale coffee and aggression radiating off him. "You have been ordered to board the transport vehicle. Your failure to comply is being recorded as resisting an officer. My partners are now in a heightened state of alert because of your erratic behavior. Every second you stand here arguing, you are putting yourself in more danger." Sanchez and Miller responded to the cue, their hands mirroring Vance's, hovering over their holsters. The air crackled with the static of their radios, a disembodied voice from dispatch asking for an ETA. But Vance ignored it, focused entirely on breaking the woman in front of him. Angela realized then that she was witnessing the birth of a false narrative. She saw how they were building the box, creating a scenario where any natural human reaction, a sigh of frustration or a shift in weight, would be logged in a police report as furtive movements or aggressive posturing. She was being treated not as a doctor at her place of employment, but as a combatant in a war zone of their making. "I am invoking my rights," she said, her voice unshaken even as Miller's shadow loomed closer behind her. "I do not consent to this seizure. I am asking again, what is the articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime?" Vance's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the hospital security cameras he hadn't noticed earlier, then back to Angela. He realized he was losing the psychological battle. And in the world of Robert Vance, when you lose the argument, you use the iron. The silence of the parking lot was no longer peaceful. It was a pressurized chamber, an ominous quiet that preceded the strike. The two flanking agents were now so close she could hear their breathing heavy, jagged, and eager. They weren't looking for the truth. They were waiting for the snap. The snapping point came not with a shout, but with the sharp, mechanical ratchet of a holster thumb brake being released. Agent Vance, sensing his psychological grip slipping against Angela's unwavering composure, decided to end the debate with the blunt instrument of physical force. He didn't give a warning. He gave a command that was more of a war cry to his subordinates. Subject is non-compliant. Secure her now. The words triggered a choreographed explosion of violence. Before Angela could utter another word of legal protest, Sanchez and Miller lunged. Sanchez grabbed her left wrist, twisting it painfully behind her back with a torque that made her shoulder joint pop, while Miller slammed his forearm into the center of her spine, driving her forward. The impact was jarring. Angela's chest was crushed against the cold, hard metal of her own SUV's hood, the very vehicle she had worked so hard to afford, now becoming an instrument of her humiliation. Her cheek was pressed into the grime of the hood, the smell of hot engine oil and road dust filling her nostrils. "I am not resisting," she cried out, her voice muffled against the metal. But Vance's knee was already in the small of her back, pinning her down with the full weight of his perceived superiority. The handcuffs clicked cold, jagged, and tight, biting into her skin with a finality that felt like the closing of a tomb door. In that moment, Doctor, Angela Morris, the woman who had spent the last 12 hours meticulously repairing a human heart, was reduced to a set of statistics in a federal database. As they hauled her upright, the commotion drew the attention of a group of night shift nurses who were just arriving for their rotation. Among them was Sarah Jennings, a head nurse who had worked alongside Angela for a decade. Seeing the chief surgeon being manhandled by men in tactical gear, Sarah rushed forward, her face pale with shock. "What are you doing? Stop!" Sarah shouted, her hands raised instinctively to stop the assault. But Miller didn't hesitate. He pivoted, placing his hand on his taser and stepping into Sarah's path with a snarl. "Get back. Move back right now, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice and interfering with a federal investigation. This is official government business. Back off." The other nurses froze, paralyzed by the sheer aggression of the threat. They watched in a state of traumatized disbelief as their respected colleague, a woman who held the lives of hundreds in her hands, was marched toward the back of the ICE transport vehicle. Angela kept her head high, though the cardigan had been ripped from her shoulders, leaving her in her wrinkled blue scrubs that still bore the faint, dried brownish stains of the trauma patient she had saved just an hour ago. It was the ultimate irony. The blood of a citizen she had protected was on her clothes, while the agents of the state treated her like a virus. The walk to the Black Expedition felt like a mile-long gauntlet. Every step was a deliberate attempt to break her dignity. Vance held the back of her neck, a grip designed for cattle, guiding her toward the open cage of the SUV. He didn't care that the parking lot lights were capturing the scene, or that phones were beginning to appear in the distant windows of the hospital wing. He felt invincible. He threw her into the back seat, a cramped, plastic-molded bench that smelled of old sweat and chemical disinfectant. The heavy door slammed shut with a metallic thud that echoed through the empty lot, plunging her into a semi-darkness. From the small, reinforced window of the cage, Angela looked back one last time. Her Lexus sat there, solitary under the flickering sodium lamp. The driver's side door was still slightly ajar, the interior light casting a warm, inviting glow on the leather seats. Her handbag sat on the passenger side, containing the very ID that could have ended this, completely ignored. The engine was likely still ticking as it cooled down, and the keys were still in the ignition, leaving her life's work and her personal sanctuary vulnerable to anyone who walked by. It was the crowning achievement of Vance's cruelty. He hadn't just taken her freedom. He had abandoned her dignity in the middle of a concrete wasteland. The drive to the Federal Processing Center took nearly 40 minutes, a journey through the neon-lit veins of Houston that felt like a descent into an alternate reality. Inside the vehicle, the agent spoke in low, casual tones about football and weekend plans, completely ignoring the woman they had just abducted from her life. Angela sat in the back, her hands beginning to go numb from the tightness of the cuffs, her mind racing. She stared at her scrubs, the uniform of her calling, and realized that to Vance, these clothes didn't signify a doctor. They signified a laborer, a transient, someone who didn't belong. She was being processed into a system designed to disappear people, a machinery of enforcement that viewed her birthright as a clerical error. When they finally pulled into the gated sally port of the detention center, the fluorescent lights overhead were blindingly bright and clinical. She was marched through a series of heavy steel doors, the clatter of her clogs on the linoleum floor. A lonely, rhythmic sound. She was no longer Dr. Morris. She was a body to be searched, a set of prints to be taken, a nameless face in a sea of suspects. As she stood against the height chart for her booking photo, still wearing those blood-stained scrubs, Angela Morris made a silent vow. She would let them take her tonight, but she would spend every breath she had left, making sure they regretted the moment they touched her. The detention cell was a windowless cube of cinder blocks and fluorescent hum, a space where time didn't pass so much as it stagnated. For 6 grueling hours, Dr. Angela Morris sat on a cold metal bench, her hands finally freed from the steel cuffs, but her spirit constrained by the suffocating bureaucracy of the federal system. Every request for a phone call, every plea to speak to a supervisor, was met with the same wall of bureaucratic indifference that Agent Vance had weaponized in the parking lot. The guards looked through her, not at her, treating her stained scrubs as the uniform of a vagrant rather than the vestments of a healer. It wasn't until 4:30 a.m. that the gears of the machine finally ground to a halt. The intervention didn't come from within the ICE hierarchy, but from the outside, spearheaded by Dr. James Sterling, the CEO of the Houston Medical Center, who had been alerted by the traumatized nursing staff. Sterling had spent the early morning hours burning through phone lines to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the District Director of ICE, threatening a media nuclear strike if his chief surgeon wasn't released immediately. When the heavy steel door finally buzzed open, there was no apology, only a cold directive from a shift supervisor to collect her things and exit through the side gate. Angela stepped out into the pre-dawn grayness of Houston, her body aching and her soul ignited by a transformative fury. She didn't go home to sleep. She went straight to the offices of Marcus Thorne, a legendary civil rights attorney whose reputation for dismantling federal agencies was etched in a decade of high-profile victories. Thorne, a man who saw the law as a scalpel for social rot, listened to Angela's account with a grim, focused silence. By the time she finished, he wasn't just planning a lawsuit, he was preparing a war. The strategy was twofold: legal precision and public transparency. Thorne knew that the federal government's greatest weapon was the shadows, so he decided to flood the case with light. Within 48 hours, they filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security and agents Vance, Sanchez, and Miller. But the true catalyst for the firestorm came when a whistleblower within the agency, disgusted by the blatant profiling, leaked the raw body cam footage from the night of September 14. The video was more damning than anyone could have imagined. It didn't just show the physical assault, it captured the audio from inside the SUV after the doors had slammed shut and Angela was caged in the back. The footage revealed Vance leaning over to Sanchez, a predatory smirk audible in his voice as he adjusted his tactical vest. "I don't care if she's the Surgeon General," Vance was heard saying over the hum of the engine. "She's got that attitude like she's untouchable. Even if she's a real doctor, someone needs to teach her a lesson about knowing her place. You don't talk back to us in this neighborhood." The phrase "knowing her place" became the lightning rod that set Houston and the nation on fire. It was the smoking gun of intent, proving that the detention wasn't a procedural error or a case of mistaken identity. It was a deliberate act of racial subjugation and professional spite. The media explosion was instantaneous. The story dominated the 24-hour news cycle, with the hashtag number Justice for Dr. Morris trending globally. The contrast was too sharp for the public to ignore. A woman who saved lives being taught a lesson by men whose only contribution that night was terror. Protests began to form outside the Houston ICE field office, led by a coalition of medical professionals wearing their white coats in solidarity. "If a chief surgeon isn't safe at her own hospital, who is?" became the rallying cry. Angela, guided by Thorne's strategic brilliance, chose her moments for public appearances with surgical precision. She didn't seek pity. She demanded accountability. In a televised interview that sat at the heart of the storm, she looked directly into the camera, her voice steady and her gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about me," she told the millions watching. "It's about a system that sees a black person in a lab coat and still only sees a suspect. It's about the fact that my education, my service, and my citizenship are treated as secondary to an officer's prejudice. I am not a lesson to be taught. I am a citizen whose rights are not optional." The legal team for the government scrambled to contain the damage, initially offering a $500,000 settlement with a strict non-disclosure agreement. Thorne threw the offer back in their faces before the ink was even dry. He knew the value of the case wasn't just in the damages, but in the discovery process. He began subpoenaing Vance's entire personnel history, uncovering the trail of complaints and quiet transfers that the agency had tried to bury. The legal firestorm wasn't just a metaphor. It was a systematic burning down of the defenses the agents had built around themselves. As the trial date approached, the city of Houston felt like a powder keg. The medical community, civil rights organizations, and ordinary citizens who had been on the receiving end of Vance's vigilant enforcement rallied behind Angela. The hospital parking lot where it all began became a shrine of sorts, covered in flowers and signs demanding reform. Angela Morris had started that night as a doctor trying to get some sleep. She had ended it as the face of a movement that was about to bring a federal agency to its knees in a court of law. The atmosphere inside the Bob Casey United States Courthouse in downtown Houston was thick with the scent of floor wax and the palpable tension of a city holding its breath. For 12 days, the trial of Dr. Angela Morris Foof. The United States of America had peeled back the layers of a broken system, exposing the rot beneath. When Angela took the witness stand, a hush fell over the gallery, which was packed with doctors in white coats, civil rights activists, and law students. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like an architect of her own justice. Under the steady questioning of Marcus Thorne, Angela recounted the night of the 14th of September 2024, but she didn't just speak of the physical pain of the handcuffs or the cold metal of the hood. She spoke of the spiritual erosion the moment she realized that 20 years of saving lives, 2 degrees from prestigious universities, and a spotless record of service meant nothing when faced with the primal bias of a man with a badge. "I realized that night," she told the jury, her voice cracking slightly but never breaking, "that in the eyes of Agent Vance, I wasn't Dr. Morris. I wasn't even a human being with a family and a future. I was a demographic profile to be subdued. I spent 12 hours that day fixing a shattered heart, only to have my own belief in the fairness of my country shattered in less than 5 minutes." The jury, a diverse cross-section of Houstonians, watched her with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Even the government's defense team seemed to shrink as the raw emotion of her testimony filled the room. The defense's attempt to characterize the incident as a stressful but procedural encounter collapsed under the weight of the evidence. When Agent Vance took the stand, Thorne was merciless. He played the leaked body cam audio, the knowing her place comment over and over, forcing Vance to hear his own prejudice echoing through the halls of justice. Vance, stripped of his tactical vest and the shield of his authority, appeared small, his arrogant smirk replaced by a defensive scowl. He could not explain why he ignored the hospital ID, why he threatened a nurse, or why he left a citizen's vehicle unsecured in a high-traffic area. The closing arguments were a masterclass in constitutional law and moral clarity. Thorne didn't ask for a settlement. He asked for a reckoning. He told the jury that their verdict would decide if Houston was a city of laws or a city of places where certain people were taught to stay. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, a staggering speed for a federal civil rights case. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, the room was so silent you could hear the rustle of the court reporter's transcripts. Guilty on all counts. Violation of the Fourth Amendment, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages were astronomical. $8 million in compensatory damages and $4.5 million in punitive damages, a total of $12. $5 million designed to send a shockwave through the Department of Homeland Security. The aftermath was swift and uncompromising. Within 48 hours of the verdict, Agent Robert Vance and his partners, Sanchez and Miller, were formally terminated from federal service. The field office supervisor who had delayed Angela's release was demoted and reassigned to a remote border outpost. But for Angela, The money was never the destination. It was the fuel for a new mission. She understood that she was one of the lucky ones. She had the status, the witnesses, and the strength to fight back. Thousands of others, less prominent and more vulnerable, were silenced every year by similar abuses of power. With her settlement, she established the Nightlight Foundation. The organization was headquartered just blocks from the medical center, providing 24-hour pro bono legal defense and emergency documentation assistance for people of color and professionals targeted by biased enforcement. She hired Marcus Thorne as the lead consultant, turning her trauma into a shield for others. The foundation became a beacon, ensuring that no one would ever have to face a man like Vance alone in the dark. The story of Dr. Angela Morris didn't end in a courtroom or on a news broadcast. It ended where it began. It was a Saturday night in late 2025, almost exactly a year after the incident. The humidity was still heavy, the neon signs of the Houston Medical Center still hummed, and the parking lot was still vast. Angela stepped out of the emergency wing, her scrubs wrinkled after another long, successful shift. She walked toward her vehicle, the same spot where she had once been pinned against the metal. But things were different now. New high-definition security cameras with direct links to hospital security and independent monitors had been installed, their lenses gleaming under the lights. As she reached her car, she paused for a moment, looking at the spot where the black SUV had once blocked her path. She felt no fear, only a quiet, resolute strength. She was no longer just a surgeon. She was a guardian of the light. She got into her car, locked the door, and drove home, leaving the shadows behind. The cameras watched her go, silent sentinels in a city that had finally been forced to learn that some people will never be taught their place because their place is exactly where they choose to stand.